In a restaurant filled with whispers and wealth, one word in Italian changed her life forever. The bitter January wind followed Sophia Russo through the glass doors of Bellissimo, the upscale Italian restaurant where she'd been working for exactly 3 months and 2 days. Her fingers were numb from the cold, her hair damp from snow, her heart racing from the sprint down Madison Avenue. She was late again. The warm air of the kitchen hit her like a wave, scented with garlic, truffle oil, and panic. "Sophia, where have you been?" Marco, the floor manager, hissed, his usually calm face twisted in frustration. He thrust an apron at her, eyes darting toward the dining room. "Table 7, VIP. You're serving them tonight." She froze mid-motion. "What? That's Jessica's section." "Jessica called in sick." He grabbed her shoulder, lowering his voice. "These people are important. Do not screw this up. Be professional, efficient." He paused, staring hard into her eyes. And invisible. Invisible. She was good at that. It had become her survival strategy since leaving Boston. Since the night everything fell apart. She forced a shaky breath, tied her apron, smoothed down her skirt, and stepped into the golden light of Bellissimo's dining room. The restaurant gleamed like a jewel box. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath chandeliers, violins played softly from hidden speakers, and the air shimmered with the quiet confidence of the wealthy. Sophia carried her notepad like a shield as she crossed the room, heels clicking against dark wood floors. The private dining area was tucked behind a set of heavy oak doors. She hesitated, hand hovering above the handle, feeling her pulse in her throat. Then she pushed through. 6 men sat around a polished mahogany table, all in tailored suits, their voices low and measured, but the one at the head of the table wasn't just another business. Sman. He was younger than she expected, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair, a sharp jaw, and eyes so deep they seemed to swallow the light. Something in the way he held himself, calm, commanding, made her skin prickle. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said, voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm Sophia, and I'll be your server tonight. May I start you with some drinks?" Conversation stilled. The man at the head of the table looked up slowly, his gaze meeting hers. The air between them tightened. "You're new," he said, not a question. "Yes, sir," she replied, forcing a polite smile. 3 months. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Scotch, neat." His voice was smooth, almost lazy, but carried authority that left no room for error. She nodded and turned away, trying to ignore the strange pull in her chest. She told herself it was just nerves. She was returning with the drinks when her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. Normally, she never checked it during work, but tonight she'd been waiting for news from Italy. Her grandmother's nurse had promised to call if anything changed. She slipped back against the wall, glanced at the screen, and answered quietly. "Pronto," she whispered, her Italian instinctively flawless. The nurse's voice trembled. "Mi dispiace, Sophia." Sophia's eyes closed, her free hand curling into a fist. The room seemed to tilt around her. "Grazie," she whispered, ending the call before her voice broke. When she looked up, the entire table had fallen silent. 6 pairs of eyes were on her, but only one gaze pinned her in place. The man at the head of the table leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Something dangerous flickered behind those dark eyes, curiosity sharpened by suspicion. "You speak Italian," he said softly, almost to himself. Sophia's throat went dry. Yes, sir. I grew up near Florence." "Interesting." The www ord rolled off his tongue like a quiet verdict. The rest of dinner passed in a blur. She moved automatically, refilling glasses, delivering plates, trying not to tremble under the weight of his attention. Every time she glanced his way, he was watching her, measuring, studying, not leering, not friendly, something else, something colder. By the time the meal ended, her nerves were frayed. She presented the check in a leather folder, which he signed without looking. When she reached for it, his fingers brushed hers, just long enough to make her freeze. "Grazie, Sophia," he said, her name curling perfectly in his accent. She nodded, forcing a smile she didn't feel. As the men filed out, he paused at the door and looked back at her. "Buonanotte." Only when he was gone did she realize she was shaking. An hour later, after the restaurant emptied, she slipped off her apron, ready to disappear into the night. But as she reached for her coat, Marco appeared, his face pale. "Sophia," he said quietly, "Mr. Richi wants to see you before you go." Her breath caught. "Mr. Richi?" "Yes," he whispered, eyes flicking toward the darkened corridor that led to the office. Sophia's heart pounded. The man from table 7, the owner, the one whose eyes had followed her every move, the one who, hours earlier, had said in that calm, dangerous voice, "Don't let her leave." The clock above the kitchen door ticked louder than usual as Sophia stood frozen near the back corridor, her apron still damp from melted snow. She could feel her heart pounding against her ribs like it was trying to escape. She had spent months trying to stay invisible, and tonight she had failed completely. Marco's voice broke through the hum of the dishwashers, his tone sharp but uncertain. "Mr. Richi is waiting for you, Sophia," he said quietly. In his 15 years of working at Bellissimo, Marco had never looked this nervous. He gestured toward the narrow hallway that lay to the private office at the back. Every instinct screamed for her to leave, to push through the staff door and vanish into the icy New York night. But the memory of her grandmother's fading voice held her back. She needed this job. She needed the money. She needed the chance to fly home before it was too late. She forced her feet to move. The corridor stretched endlessly, dimly lit and lined with framed photographs of Florence and Venice at the far end. A single door stood open, spilling a warm amber light into the darkness. The man from table 7 sat behind a sleek wooden desk. His jacket removed the sleeves of his crisp white shirt rolled up, revealing strong forearms and a gold watch that caught the light. He didn't look up immediately. Instead, he wrote something with slow, deliberate strokes, as if time itself bent to his rhythm. Finally, he raised his head, and their eyes met. It felt like standing too close to a fire, not painful yet, impossible to ignore. "Sit, please," he said, his voice deep with that faint Italian undertone that turned simple words into commands. She sat on the edge of the chair, hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "You speak Italian," he said softly. She hesitated. "I was born near Florence. My mother was American, so I grew up with both languages, I see." He leaned back, studying her like a puzzle, one that intrigued him. "What brings you to New York?" She hesitated again, searching for something safe to say, a fresh start. His eyebrow arched as if he already knew the truth. He probably did. "You have family still in Italy?" "My grandmother. She's ill in hospice. I'm sorry to hear that." His tone was polite, almost gentle. Then he opened a drawer and slid a black folder across the desk. "Open it." Inside was a first-class plane ticket to Florence leaving the next day. Beneath it, an envelope filled with thick stacks of euros. Sophia's breath caught. "I don't understand." "I'm traveling to Italy tomorrow for business. I require someone who speaks native Italian. My usual interpreter is unavailable. You'll come with me, translate, attend meetings, and be compensated handsomely." He gestured to the folder. "You'll also have time to visit your grandmother." Her fingers trembled as she touched the paper. It felt unreal. Too convenient. Too dangerous. "Why me?" she asked softly. "Surely you could hire anyone, because I prefer someone authentic, someone whose loyalties aren't already bought." His eyes never left her face, and because I don't believe in coincidence, the air between them thickened. She couldn't tell if it was threat or curiosity that fueled his words, but something in his gaze made it clear he already knew more about her than he should. She stood clutching the folder. "I need time to think about it." "Of course," he said smoothly. "The flight leaves at 3 tomorrow afternoon. A car will pick you up at noon. How do you know where I live?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He smiled faintly. "I make it my business to know about those who work for me." The words chilled her more than the January wind outside. She turned to leave, but his voice followed her. "One more thing, Sophia." She stopped at the door, glancing back. "Your grandmother doesn't have much time, neither do you." The sound of her name in his voice lingered like smoke as she walked out of the office, her legs unsteady when she stepped into the night. The cold hit her like a slap. Headlights flashed as a black car pulled up to the curb, and for a heartbeat, she thought it had come for her already. She climbed into a taxi. Instead, staring through the window as the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and red, she told herself she would refuse that. She wouldn't let a stranger control her again. But deep down, she knew it was already too late. The next morning, she woke before dawn, her suitcase open on the bed and the folder on her nightstand. The ticket gleamed under the faint morning light. Her phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. "The car will arrive at noon. Miss Russo." Her stomach twisted as she read the words outside on the street below. A man in a dark coat stood smoking, watching her window. She drew the curtain closed, but the feeling of his gaze remained. She whispered to herself she would only go to see her grandmother. Just that, nothing more. But even as she packed her passport and the envelope of cash, she couldn't silence the thought echoing in her head. This isn't a job. It's the beginning of something she won't be able to escape. The city still slept under a pale gray dawn. When the black Mercedes stopped in front of Sophia's building, the street was silent except for the hiss of tires on wet pavement. She stood at her window watching the car engine humming steady and patient like a heartbeat waiting for her. She had told herself she wouldn't go. She had promised herself she would burn that ticket. But the envelope of cash and the thought of her grandmother's frail voice had already changed her decision. When she stepped outside, the driver opened the door without a word, his face unreadable. The smell of expensive leather filled the car as she slid into the back seat. A long black coat lay neatly folded beside her. She hesitated before touching it, then realized it was hers, her size, her initials embroidered inside. She swallowed hard, the realization creeping in. This man didn't offer opportunities, he orchestrated destinies. The city faded behind them, skyscrapers dissolving into gray clouds. The driver said nothing. The radio played softly in Italian. She stared at the skyline shrinking in the distance, feeling as if she was being erased from her own life. At the airport there were no crowds, no lines. A private terminal waited, sleek and empty, with men in black suits who didn't glance twice as she walked past. Dante Richi stood near the jet window phone in hand, his dark hair slightly tousled, his presence calm and commanding as if the entire world revolved quietly around him. "You are on time," he said without turning. She managed a faint nod. The driver handed her suitcase to an attendant who disappeared into the plane. She wanted to ask questions, but his presence made words feel dangerous. As they boarded, she realized it wasn't a commercial plane, but a private jet, spacious and silent with soft white seats and glass so clear the sky looked infinite. Dante gestured for her to sit across from him. The engine started with a low roar. He poured her coffee himself and smiled, a small gesture that only made her more nervous. "You seem uneasy," he said. "Perhaps you don't trust me." She met his gaze, struggling to hide her fear. "I don't know you." "You shouldn't trust anyone," he replied, his tone unreadable, then leaned back, watching her with the same intensity as that night in the restaurant. The flight stretched endlessly. Clouds rolled beneath them like oceans. He asked her about Florence, about the neighborhood where she grew up. She answered carefully, never revealing too much, but when she mentioned her grandmother, his expression softened just a little. "You remind me of my mother," he said quietly. "She used to say, 'Only fools think they control fate.'" Sophia looked out the window, the words lingering like prophecy halfway through the flight. She noticed a black folder beside him. He had been writing in it. She caught a glimpse of her name printed on the top. Her stomach tightened. "That's mine, isn't it?" He didn't answer. Instead, he said, "You change your phone number. Often. You moved 3 times in 6 months." "Why?" She froze. Every lie she had prepared vanished. "I was trying to start over. You were running from someone," he said, not unkindly. The plane tilted slightly, the sky outside turning gold as they crossed the Atlantic. He stood, walked toward the window and spoke softly, almost to himself. "You don't need to run anymore. Not from anyone. Not while you're under my protection." Her voice trembles. "Protection from who? From yourself," he said, turning to face her, his eyes dark and unreadable. When the plane landed, the sun had already set. The air smelled of rain and olives. The runway surrounded by rolling Tuscan hills. The villa waited atop a hill, its lights glowing like fireflies as the car climbed the winding road. She watched the landscape blur by her thoughts, scattered between fear, curiosity, and something she couldn't name. At the gates, 2 guards opened the tall iron doors as if expecting royalty. The car stopped in front of a sprawling mansion, its marble steps glistening with rain. Dante stepped out first, extending his hand. She hesitated before taking it. His grip was warm, steady, commanding. "Welcome to my home, Sophia," he said softly. Inside the villa, silence reigned. The air smelled of roses and something darker, like smoke, and history portraits lined the walls. Eyes following her every move, she was led to a room overlooking the vineyards. A silk dress waited on the bed with a note in elegant handwriting. "Wear this tonight." She turned to ask what it meant, but the maid had already gone outside. Lightning flickered across the distant hills, the sky heavy with storm. She sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching the fabric between her fingers. A sound made her freeze. Footsteps soft, deliberate. Someone stopped outside her door. She waited, breath held until a voice low and familiar came through the wood. "Don't be afraid of the storm, Sophia. It only sounds dangerous before it passes." Then the footsteps faded, and she was alone again. Yet something inside her whispered that the real storm hadn't even begun. The storm came with no warning. Thunder rolling across the Tuscan hills as rain lashed the stone walls of the villa. Sophia stood by the window watching lightning paint the vineyards in flashes of silver. She felt small inside that vast room, too beautiful to belong to her, too silent to fee. Ill alive, every shadow whispered her name. Every flicker of candlelight made her turn. A knock came soft but deliberate. The door opened before she could answer. Dante stood there in a black suit, no tie, his dark hair damp from the rain. The sight of him pulled the air out of the room. "You should come downstairs," he said. "There's someone I want you to meet." She followed him through corridors lined with art that looked centuries old. The marble floors gleamed like mirrors. Servants passed quietly, their eyes avoiding hers. She couldn't tell if it was respect or fear. The dining hall waited at the end, lit by 100 candles, a long table filled with men and women dressed in black, their laughter low-controlled like the hum of a dangerous machine. The scent of wine filled the air as she took her seat beside Dante. Every conversation stopped for a heartbeat when she entered. He introduced her simply. "This is Sophia. She will be assisting me for a time." The guests smiled, but their eyes searched her like knives. Curiosity mixed with calculation. An older man with silver hair raised his glass to Dante, to the House of Richi and the loyalty that never dies. The others echoed the toast, their voices cold and precise. Sophia lifted her glass, but her hand shook. Dante leaned close, his breath brushing her ear. "Don't show fear, they'll taste it." As dinner began, she realized this wasn't a meal. It was a performance. Deals were made beneath laughter, promises sealed behind smiles. She translated effortlessly between Italian and English until her voice grew dry. She was good at hiding nerves, but she couldn't ignore how the tension in the room built around her like invisible smoke. Then came the moment that froze her. An elegant woman with red lipstick and diamond earrings leaned toward Dante, her voice smooth as silk. "Your taste in translators has improved dramatically," she said. "Perhaps this one will last longer than the others." The table went still. The woman smiled sweetly, but the challenge in her tone, cut like glass. Sophia's stomach dropped. "The others." Dante's hand tightened on his glass, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned to Sophia and asked in a voice calm enough to silence the room, "Would you translate that for our guest, Sophia?" She hesitated, then replied in Italian, "The gentleman thanks you for your concern and assures you that loyalty is not measured in time, but in truth." The woman's smile faltered. Laughter rippled around the table. Dante looked at Sophia, his expression unreadable, but there was pride in his eyes, faint and fleeting before it vanished into shadow. After dinner, as guests drifted away, one of the guards whispered something to Dante. His jaw tightened. He excused himself. Leaving Sophia alone in the flickering candlelight, a young maid approached her quietly. "Be careful," Signorina Maria whispered. "Not all who dine here are guests. Some are wolves pretending to prey." Sophia turned to ask what she meant, but Maria was gone, replaced by silence. She made her way back to her room. The corridors darker now, the storm outside raging harder. She thought she saw movement near the staircase, a shadow slipping out of sight. She froze, listening. Only thunder answered. When she reached her room, she locked the door and sank into the chair by the window. Lightning lit the hills again, and for an instant she saw someone standing by the vineyard gate, watching the house, unmoving. Her phone buzzed a new message. No number. Only words written in Italian. "He is not who you think." Her pulse quickened. She tried calling back, but the message vanished. The power flickered. The lights dimmed and then went out, plunging the villa into darkness. The door handle turned once. Slowly she rose, her breath shallow. Dante's voice came from the other side, soft but commanding. "Open the door." Sophia, her fingers hesitated on the lock. The thunder roared outside when she opened it. He stood there, candle in hand, his fa, ace half-shadowed. "I told you not to fear the storm," he said, "but storms reveal truth, not just rain." Behind him, at the end of the corridor, she saw 2 guards dragging a man soaked and beaten across the floor. "Who is that?" she whispered. "A thief," he said quietly, but his eyes never left hers, as if daring her to ask the question she was too afraid to speak. What if he's not the only one kept here against his will? The thunder rolled again, drowning the silence between them. She looked at him and realized she wasn't afraid of the storm anymore. She was afraid of the calm that followed it. The rain stopped before dawn, leaving the villa wrapped in a heavy mist. Sophia hadn't slept. Her thoughts were filled with the image of the man dragged across the floor. His face bruised, his eyes wide with silent terror. She told herself it wasn't her concern, but guilt crawled under her skin, refusing to leave. When she stepped out of her room, the air smelled of smoke and coffee. The corridors were empty until she reached the staircase, where she heard voices low and sharp. Dante's voice steady and calm, and another man's trembling. She stopped halfway down the stairs, unseen. The trembling voice said, "She didn't know anything. I swear." Dante. Silence followed, then a single sound like a chair being kicked over. Her breath caught. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. Dante's voice came again, quiet and cold. "Remove him before sunrise." The sound of footsteps faded. She backed away, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. When she turned, she found Maria standing behind her, pale and shaking. "You should not listen to things that aren't meant for you," Maria whispered. She pressed a small silver key into Sophia's palm. "If you need to leave the service door behind, the kitchen leads to the hills. Go, before he changes his mind. Before he changes his mind." The words stuck in her chest as she hid the key in her pocket. Later that morning, Dante appeared in the garden where she sat pretending to read. He looked different, softer almost. Human in the daylight, he poured her tea himself and smiled. "You didn't sleep," he said. "I can always tell." She met his gaze, unsure how to answer. He leaned closer. "Last night frightened you, didn't it?" Her fingers tightened on the cup. "I heard something that wasn't meant for me," she said. He studied her expression, then spoke quietly. "You think I'm a monster? But I only do what is necessary. Every empire is built on choices. Some men build with gold, others with silence." His words unsettled her because they carried truth and danger in equal measure. She wanted to hate him, but part of her wanted to understand him too. He looked at her the way one looks at a reflection, unsure if it is real or illusion. "I don't need you to trust me, Sophia," he said, "but I want you to see me." That evening, the villa hosted another gathering, smaller but filled with tension, men in tailored suits, women with sharp smiles. The atmosphere electric. She stayed close to Dante, translating whispering answers in his ear, their proximity intoxicating and suffocating all at once. His hand brushed hers beneath the table, a small spark that made her heart stumble. Halfway through the dinner, one of the guests, a thin man with cruel eyes, laughed and said, "So this is the new interpreter. I heard the last one tried to run. How long will this one last?" Dante's expression turned to steel. The room fell silent. The thin man kept smiling until Dante spoke in Italian, a single word that made the others straighten. "Basta, enough." After the dinner, Dante took her to the balcony overlooking the vineyards. The moonlight touched his face, revealing exhaustion beneath the control. He offered her a glass of wine, but his voice was low, filled with warning. "You heard many things about me tonight. Some true, some lies. What matters is what you choose to believe." "Why me?" she asked. "Why bring me here?" He looked at her for a long time before answering. "Because you remind me of something I lost a long time ago, something honest and unbroken." For a moment, silence stretched between them, the night heavy with unspoken things. Then he moved closer, his hand reaching for her cheek, slow enough for her to step away, but she didn't. When his lips met hers, it wasn't gentle. It was a confession of everything he refused to say. The taste of wine, the heat of his breath, the danger of wanting him. She should have pulled back, but couldn't. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "You shouldn't have come into my world, Sophia," she whispered. "Maybe I didn't have a choice." He smiled sadly. "Neither did I." As they stood in the darkness, the sound of a phone rang from inside his study. His expression hardened instantly. He excused himself, disappearing into the shadows. She followed quietly, and from the doorway, heard his voice cold again. "The girl is here. Yes, she doesn't know yet. Keep it that way." Her heart dropped. She backed away before he could see her, returning to her room in silence. Outside, lightning flickered again. Though the sky was clear, she locked her door and leaned against it. Trembling, he had kissed her, but lied in the same breath. On the desk by her bed lay the silver key Maria had given her. She picked it up, staring at it under the moonlight. Her only way out, her only proof of choice. But her heart whispered something she didn't want to believe. If she left, she might never know the truth, and if she stayed the truth, might destroy her. The morning came with a heavy fog that blanketed the Tuscan hills. The vineyards disappeared beneath a veil of white, and the world outside the villa felt distant, unreal. Sophia stood by the window, still holding the silver key Maria had given her. She had not slept, her mind torn between fear and the haunting pull of the man whose voice could make her tremble and calm in the same breath. Downstairs, the house was too quiet, even for a place this large. No sound of staff, no smell of breakfast, just silence. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she saw 2 guards by the front door. One of them nodded politely, but his eyes were watchful. She forced a small smile and walked toward the back corridor. Her plan was simple. She would use the service door, slip into the fog, and disappear before anyone noticed. She reached the kitchen and found Maria there, scrubbing the counter, her hands shaking when she looked up. Relief flickered across her face. "You are leaving?" she whispered. Sophia nodded. "I have to." Maria wiped her hands and pointed to the door behind the pantry. "Hurry before." The door opened before she could finish. Dante stood there, still in his black shirt from the night before. Rain dripping from his coat, his eyes sharp and unreadable. "Where are you going, Sophia?" The air vanished from the room. She stammered, "I needed air." He stepped closer. "The fog outside will swallow you," he said softly. "And what waits beyond it is worse than what waits here." Her heart pounded. She met his gaze, defiant. "Maybe I am willing to risk it?" He studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Come with me." He led her through the back corridors into a part of the villa she had never seen. The air colder, the walls lined with old portraits of men who shared Dante's eyes. They stopped at a locked door. He produced a key of his own and turned it open. The room beyond wasn't large, but it felt heavy with memories. Books, maps, ledgers, photographs. One wall was covered with black and white pictures of Florence after the war. In the center of them was a faded photograph of a woman holding a child, her face gentle, her smile familiar. "My mother," he said quietly. She was from Florence too. She believed in things that cost her everything. She believed that power without mercy is just fear, dressed as elegance. Sophia looked at the picture and then at him. What happened to her? He walked to the window, his voice low. She died for a truth she refused to bury. She wanted to ask more, but a sharp sound cut through the silence, a phone vibrating on the desk. Dante answered in Italian, his tone tense. Short words exchanged. He hung up his jaw, tightening. "That was your grandmother's hospice," he said. "Her condition has changed." Her stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" she asked. He met her eyes. "It means we leave now." The drive to Florence was long and silent. The fog gave way to rain again. Dante's face was unreadable as he drove through narrow roads. She wanted to speak, but fear of the answer kept her quiet. When they reached the hospice, her hands trembled so much she could barely open the door. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and fading roses. Her grandmother lay small and pale beneath thin white sheets. The nurse bowed slightly and left them alone. "Nonna," she whispered. The old woman's eyes opened and softened when she saw Dante. "You look just like your father," she murmured, her voice weak but sure. Dante froze his expression, breaking for the first time in front of Sophia. "You knew my father?" he asked. "Yes," Nonna said quietly. "Antonio Richi was a good man before they turned him into something else." Sophia's breath caught her mind spinning. "What are you saying, Nonna?" The old woman smiled faintly. "Our families were bound long before you were born. Your grandfather saved his life. Once your name carries a debt." "Sophia." Dante turned away, his jaw tight. He took a step back, as if distance could undo the weight of history. "Your grandmother is mistaken," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Nonna reached for Sophia's hand, her fingers trembling. "Child, remember, love without truth is only a softer kind of prison." She closed her eyes again, whispering something in Italian, a prayer, a warning. Then her hand went still. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky again, the storm returning as if to mark the moment. Sophia stood frozen beside the bed, tears silent, her mind breaking under the weight of what she had heard. Dante placed his hand on her shoulder, his voice quiet. "I didn't know," he whispered, but Sophia wasn't sure she believed him. That night back at the villa, she couldn't sleep. She replayed her grandmother's words again and again, until they became part of the wind outside. Your name carries a debt. She rose and walked to the window, the moonlight spilling across the vineyards. Somewhere below, in the courtyard, Dante stood alone, smoking, staring into the dark. She watched him for a long time, wondering if the man she was beginning to love was the same man her blood had been fated to destroy the morning after her grandmother's death came with a silence that felt wrong, the kind that hummed under the skin like a storm that refused to leave. Sophia woke in the villa, but the air felt different, colder, heavier. She could hear distant voices downstairs, men speaking in Italian, their tones clipped and urgent. Something was happening. She dressed quickly and stepped into the corridor. The marble floors echoed beneath her feet, every sound sharp as glass. As she reached the top of the stairs, she saw Dante standing by the fireplace, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice calm but deadly. "You tell Ferrero that if he touches anything that belongs to me, I will burn what is left of his empire." The line went silent. He ended the call and turned his eyes, finding her instantly. "You're awake," he said softly. She wanted to ask who Ferrero was, but something in his expression stopped her. His eyes held exhaustion mixed with something darker. "I'm sorry for your loss," he continued. "Your grandmother was a strong woman, Sophia." She nodded, her throat tight. She wanted to thank him for bringing her, but before she could speak, the sound of glass shattering cut through the hall. One of the guards stumbled in, blood running from his arm. "They found us!" he gasped. Ferrero's men outside in the vineyard. Dante's calm vanished, replaced by steel. "Get her to the east wing," he ordered. The guard tried to protest, but Dante's voice was sharp. "Do it now." Sophia's heart raced as another crash echoed through the courtyard, men shouting outside. The air smelled of gunpowder and brisheau. The guard led her through back corridors she had never seen, marble turned to stone. Walls, old tunnels that seemed to run beneath the villa as they moved. She caught fragments of voices behind them. Dante shouting orders, bullets cracking against stone. The guard stopped at a metal door hidden behind a tapestry. He fumbled with a key, then pushed it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down. "Go," he said. She hesitated. "Where does it lead to the old wine cellars?" he replied. "You'll be safe there." But she didn't go. Instead, she turned back and ran toward the hall, ignoring his calls. She couldn't leave him. Not like this. She followed the noise, the air thick with smoke and chaos. When she entered the courtyard, the scene froze. Her men in black firing across the vineyard, others dragging crates into trucks. Dante stood behind a stone pillar, pistol in hand, firing with precision, his calm terrifying. "Sophia, get down!" he shouted. She dropped behind a fountain as glass rained around her. Moments later, the shooting stopped. Silence heavy and unreal. Dante moved toward her face, streaked with dirt and rain. "You're bleeding," she whispered. "It's nothing," he said. Guards dragged 2 men forward. Captured Ferrero's soldiers. One of them sneered. "Even dying. Your father's shadow still hunts you. Richi." Dante's jaw clenched. He raised his gun, then stopped, glancing at Sophia. "Leave," he said quietly to the guards. "Take them away." She followed him back inside, both of them breathing hard, the storm outside slowly fading. He poured whiskey into a glass, his hand trembling slightly. He looked at her and said, "Ferrero was my father's rival when he died. The old debts became mine. Now he wants what I built." He looked out the window where smoke still rose over the fields. "And maybe he wants you too." "Me," she said. "Why would he want me? Because of what your grandmother said. Our families are linked, more than we realized," he said, his tone softer, almost resigned. "I didn't bring you here to trap you. I brought you because you were already part of this before we met." The words hit her like thunder. "Part of this," she repeated. "What does that mean?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Your grandfather saved my father from a deal that would have destroyed him, but it cost his life. Ferrero never forgot, and now he thinks hurting you will hurt me." Sophia felt the room spin, so all this wasn't coincidence. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "You knew there was something between our families," he said. "I didn't know what until now." She stared at him, anger and fear twisting together. "You kept me here to protect me or to control me." His answer was soft. Both, before she could speak. Maria burst into the room, her face pale. "Ferrero escaped," she whispered, but not before leaving a message. He said, "This isn't over, and that the girl will choose who dies next." Dante's expression hardened, the color draining from his face. "Tell the guards to lock down every exit." He turned to Sophia, his voice low but firm. "From now on, you don't leave my sight." She stared at him. Her pulse wild outside. The wind rose again, carrying the scent of fire and rain. She didn't know whether the man standing before her was her protector or her curse. Only that fate had tied them together long before either of them had a choice. Night returned to the Tuscan hills, but the villa no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a trap, every door locked, every shadow whispering Sophia's name. The guards moved silently along the halls, their footsteps echoing against the marble floors, like ghosts. She could still smell the smoke from the vineyard fire. It clung to her hair, her clothes, and her thoughts. Dante had ordered everyone to remain inside until morning, but sleep was impossible. She stood at the window of her room, watching lightning crawl across the distant hills. Ferrero's words haunted her. The girl will choose who dies next. She didn't know what it meant, but she felt it circling closer like a predator waiting for the right moment. A soft knock made her jump. She opened the door, expecting Maria, but found Dante instead, his shirt undone, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't be awake," he said softly. "I could say the same to you," she replied. He gave a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Come with me, I need to show you something." He led her through the east wing, past corridors she hadn't seen before, until they reached a steel door hidden behind a velvet curtain. He unlocked it with a thumbprint scanner, and the door slid open, revealing a narrow passage lit by blue lights. The air grew colder, the sound of humming machines filled the space. When she stepped inside, she realized it wasn't a room. It was an underground control center. Screens lined the walls displaying security footage of the estate, the vineyards, the gates, the road leading to the city. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "My father built it after the war." Dante said he believed protection was the only form of love worth keeping alive. "Now it's my burden." He tapped a screen. One camera showed Ferrero's men regrouping in the hills. "They're waiting for dawn," he added. Her pulse quickened. "And what will you do? Wait for them?" He turned to her slowly. "No, I'll go to them." She stared at him, shocked. "That's suicide. You can't trust anyone out there." "I don't trust anyone," he said quietly. "But fear has never saved anyone." She stepped closer, anger rising. "You think walking into danger will protect me? What if that's exactly what Ferrero wants?" His jaw tightened. "Maybe, but if I stay here, he'll burn everything I own, including you." She realized then, he wasn't just fighting Ferrero, he was fighting himself, the side of him that still believed he could control fate. She touched his arm and said, "You can't protect me by destroying yourself." He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time and whispered, "Maybe I can't protect you at all," before she could answer the alarm blared across the room, red lights flashing on the screens. Ferrero's men had breached the north gate. The power flickered and went out, plunging the tunnel into darkness. Backup lights buzzed to life in dull red. Dante grabbed her hand. "We need to move now." They ran through the tunnels, the sound of footsteps and gunfire echoing above them. The villa shuddered as explosions shook the ground. When they reached a service exit near the stables, the cold air hit them like a blade outside. The vineyards were burning again, orange flames tearing through rows of vines, the night sky glowing with smoke. He pulled her toward a car waiting behind the stables. "Get in!" he shouted. But before she could move, a figure stepped from the shadows. Ferrero, his white suit stained with rain and ash, his smile calm as if he'd been expecting them. Sophia froze as Ferrero spoke. "So this is the famous girl, the one you hid in your house like a secret. I must admit, she looks exactly like her grandmother." Dante's body went still, his voice low. "Don't say her name." Ferrero laughed. "Everything repeats itself. Richi. The debts of fathers paid by the children." He turned his gaze on Sophia, his tone almost kind. "You can end this if you wish. Just tell me where he hides the ledgers and I'll let you both live." Sophia's heart pounded. "What ledgers?" Dante's grip on her arm tightened. "Don't listen to him." She looked between them, seeing truth in both faces. Ferrero's words too confident, Dante's silence too heavy. Before she could speak, Ferrero raised his gun. A shot cracked through the rain. Dante pushed her to the ground. Another shot followed. Glass shattered above them, and when she opened her eyes, Ferrero was gone. Dante knelt beside her, his shoulder bleeding. "We have to go," he said, his voice weak. She helped him into the car, her hands trembling as she started the engine. The road wound down the hill, the fire chasing them like a beast. Behind them. The villa burned a golden ruin against the night sky, and as they drove into the darkness, she realized everything she had known. About him, every lie, every half-truth was only the beginning of something much more dangerous, because Ferrero hadn't wanted money or power. He had wanted her, And somewhere deep inside she began to understand why the road twisted through the mountains like a serpent, the rain falling harder with every mile. Sophia kept both hands tight on the wheel, her knuckles pale. Dante sat beside her, his shoulder bleeding but his eyes alert. The glow of fire behind them slowly disappeared, swallowed by the night. She wanted to speak, but fear sat heavy in her throat. He watched her through the reflection in the glass and said softly, "You drive like someone who has nowhere left to run." She didn't answer. She just pressed harder on the gas, the silence between them louder than the thunder. Finally, she asked, "Why did Ferrero say he wanted me?" What did he mean? Dante's jaw tightened. He stared at the dark road ahead, his voice low. "Because you are the last piece of what he couldn't take from my father." His words made no sense, but she could feel the truth inside them, heavy and ancient. When they reached the top of the mountain, the rain slowed. A cabin stood there, hidden among the trees, its lights dim. He guided her inside. The air smelled of cedar and cold smoke. She helped him sit near the fireplace, the wound on his shoulder bleeding through his shirt. She found a first aid kit in the kitchen and returned. He didn't protest as she cleaned the blood, but when she touched his skin, he flinched, not from pain but from something deeper. She whispered, "You should rest." And he whispered back, "If I rest, Ferrero wins." When she looked into his eyes, she saw exhaustion and something else, guilt. He reached for the fire poker and stared into the flames. "I wasn't supposed to meet you," he said. "Not like this. My father left a letter before he died. He said one day a woman would appear and she would carry the truth that would either save us or destroy us. I didn't believe him until the night you answered that phone in Italian." She froze, remembering that night at the restaurant, the way his gaze had locked onto hers. It wasn't coincidence he had been waiting for her without realizing it. The storm rumbled outside the cabin. She poured him water and asked what truth Ferrero kept calling you. His father's debt. What is he talking about? Dante looked at her, the firelight flickering in his eyes. "Your grandfather wasn't just a worker for my father. He was the man who uncovered everything. The ledgers Ferrero mentioned are proof of what our families did during the war. Money laundering, weapons deals. People who disappeared, those ledgers could bring down everyone, including me." She stepped back, shaking her head. "No, you're lying." "I'm not," he said quietly. "I've spent my life trying to fix what my father built, but Ferrero wants the ledgers to make sure no one ever finds redemption, and he believes your grandfather hid them somewhere only his bloodline could find. So he wants me," she whispered. "Not because of you, but because of what I might know." Dante nodded slowly. "You are the key, Sophia, but I swear I never meant to use you." Her heart broke at the sound of his voice, tired and sincere. She turned away from him, walking to the window. The rain had stopped, but the world outside was nothing but fog. Then she saw it. Headlights, 2 cars climbing the road too fast. She turned. "Dante, they found us." He grabbed his gun and limped toward the door. "Stay behind me," he ordered. The sound of engines grew louder. A shadow moved past the window. A gunshot shattered the glass. She dropped to the floor as Dante fired back. The air filled with smoke and panic. The front door burst open. One of Ferrero's men stormed in. But Dante moved faster. The man fell silent seconds later. Sophia crawled toward the desk, looking for something. Anything she could use, and found a small box hidden under loose floorboards. Inside was an old photograph, her grandfather shaking hands with Dante Richi, the same man from Dante's mother's picture. She looked closer and saw a folded paper behind it, written in faded ink. She opened it, words scrawled in Italian. "If you are reading this, it means the sins of our blood have found you. The truth lies where the vineyard first began, beneath the roots of what we stole." She looked up. Dante was at the door, reloading his weapon. She ran to him, holding the paper. "The vineyard," she said, breathless. "It's there. The ledgers are buried there." His eyes widened, and before he could respond, a bullet tore through the window, striking the wall beside them. He grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the back exit. They stumbled into the rain, running into the trees, as the cabin behind them erupted in flames. The sky burned red above the mountain. Lightning splitting the horizon. She could hear voices shouting her name and Dante's. Her pulse thundered with one thought: the vineyard, the truth. Everything began there, and everything would end there, but as they disappeared into the forest, she didn't see the black car waiting at the bottom of the hill, Ferrero inside, his cold smile, illuminated by the glow of his cigarette as he whispered into his phone. "Let them run. They'll only lead us to it." Dawn broke through the fog like a blade cutting through silence. The hills of Tuscany shimmered with dew and ash. Sophia and Dante moved through the forest, their clothes torn, their faces streaked with smoke and rain. The ground was slick beneath their feet. She could still hear faint gunfire behind them echoing through the trees, but she kept going, her mind fixed on the note in her hand. The vineyard. The truth lies where the vineyard first began. They reached the edge of the valley, the land stretching, wide and ruined, the vineyard once perfect. Now nothing but scorched vines and smoldering soil smoke curled upward from the remains of the fire. Dante stopped breathing hard. His eyes scanning the horizon, he pointed toward an old stone well half hidden by vines. "That's where it began," he said. "That's where my father built his first estate. If the letter is right, it's where the ledgers were buried." They moved quickly, the air thick with tension. Sophia's hands trembled as she pushed away vines, revealing the cracked stones of the well. The wood covering it was charred but still solid. Dante pried it open using the butt of his gun, and together they peered inside, nothing but darkness and the faint glint of metal. A storm wind swept through the valley, bending the dead vines. The sound of engines echoed from the hill above. Ferrero's men were coming. Sophia looked down the well and whispered, "We don't have time." Dante nodded, his face grim. He wrapped a rope around his arm and handed her the other end. "Stay here. If anything happens, you run." Before she could argue, he disappeared into the darkness below. She waited, her breath shallow, the rope shifting in her hands. Minutes passed. Then a muffled shout came from below. "I found them." Her relief lasted only a second before a voice behind her spoke. Too calm, too familiar. "Step away from the well." "Sophia." She turned slowly. Ferrero stood there, his white suit immaculate despite the ash, his men surrounding him, guns raised. "Where is he?" she asked, trying to hide her fear. Ferrero smiled. "You already know he's where he belongs, beneath the lies his father built. Give me the ledgers, and I'll let you live." His tone was smooth as wine, but his eyes were cold. "I don't have them," she said. "You're lying." He took a step closer. "I don't need to hurt you, but I will." A sound came from the well, the creak of metal. Then Dante's voice, faint but steady. "Sophia, throw the rope down again. Hurry." She did. Ferrero's men moved forward, but before they could reach her, a shot rang out. One man fell. Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked through the air. Dante climbed out of the well, one hand clutching a small iron box, the other gripping his weapon. He fired twice, forcing Ferrero to duck behind a burnt tree. Then he grabbed Sophia's arm. "Run!" She hesitated, looking at the box. "What's in it?" "The truth," he said. "The thing that will end this." They ran through the ruins, bullets chasing them as they reached an old storage shed. Dante kicked the door shut and slid the bolt. He set the iron box on a barrel, his hands shaking as he opened it. Inside were ledgers, pages filled with names, transactions, deaths going back decades. Ferrero, my father, your grandfather, all of them tied to the same blood-stained empire. Sophia's chest tightened. It wasn't just about money, it was about people sold, betrayed, forgotten. "This is what Ferrero killed for," Dante said. "And what my father died protecting." He looked at her with something like despair in his eyes. "Now it's yours to decide. Destroy it or expose it." Before she could answer, the door exploded inward. Ferrero stepped through, gun in hand, his smile calm as if he had already won. "You always think you can rewrite the past, Richi, but history always finds a way to repeat itself." He raised the gun, aiming at Dante. Sophia moved before she could think, grabbing the lantern from the wall and hurling it at Ferrero. The flames burst across the floor, catching the spilled wine on the ground. The shed ignited in seconds. Dante fired. Ferrero fell, his body swallowed by fire. The ledgers lay open on the barrel, pages curling from the heat. Dante pulled Sophia toward the back door, but she stopped staring at the burning pages. "If we destroy them, it all stays buried," she said. "Dante's voice broke through the smoke. "Some things are meant to burn." She looked at him, then at the flames, and nodded together. They ran into the dawn as the shed collapsed behind them. They didn't stop until they reached the cliffs overlooking the valley, the first light of morning spilling across the horizon. Below them, the vineyard burned a field of red and gold. Dante stood beside her silent. She turned to him. "What happens now?" He looked out at the rising sun, his voice quiet. "We start over, but not here, not in the shadow of ghosts." She touched his hand the first time without fear. His skin warmed despite the chill of dawn. "Maybe this is what your mother meant," she said. "Power without mercy is just fear dressed as elegance." He smiled faintly. And maybe love without truth is just another lie. The wind rose around them, carrying the last smoke of the vineyard away, as if cleansing the land of everything that had been lost. He turned to her, eyes filled with something new. Not control, not power, but peace. "Stay with me, Sophia," he whispered. She looked at him, the man who had once been her captor, now standing before her, stripped of everything but honesty. "I'm already here," she said. The sun climbed higher, and the valley below shimmered with light. The fire gone, the earth quiet again, and for the first time in years, both of them stood free, not saved by fate, but by the choice to face it together. In the distance, the bells of Florence rang across the hills, and the sound carried softly on the wind like a promise that even after ruin, something new could still begin.